Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome back to another fantasy edition of Get Sharp. I am Joe Fortenbaugh, and we're here today to talk starts and sits heading into week 2. We're not going to waste any time. Let's get right after it, and let's start with the start category for this week. These are the players you want to have in your lineups if they're on your roster. Starting at quarterback, Rex Grossman from the Washington Redskins. I know it sounds crazy, but in 4 career starts as a starting quarterback for the Washington Redskins, Grossman's thrown for over 300 yards 3 times. He did it last week against the Giants at home. He threw for 305 and 2 touchdowns. This week he welcomes in an Arizona Cardinals team that gave up 422 passing yards to Cam Newton, a rookie in his debut last season. On the road, I love the matchup. Grossman, he should be in the lineup. Big numbers this week. That also goes for Jabbar Gaffney, for owners in deeper leagues, and for Santana Moss as well. Washington should put up plenty of points this weekend. Also at the quarterback position, Matthew Stafford from the Detroit Lions. Also threw for 305 yards last week on the road in a very humid and hot environment at Tampa Bay. Now he comes home for the fast track at Ford Field and welcomes in a Kansas City defense that is without starting safety Eric Berry. He tore his ACL last week. He's done for the season. And B, got torched for 41 points and 4 touchdowns by Ryan Fitzpatrick of the Buffalo Bills last weekend. Stafford's in for another big week. He should be in your starting lineup. Moving along to the running back position, let's get Peyton Hillis, running back Cleveland Browns, back in the lineup. 57 yards on 17 carries last week against Cincinnati. Not a very impressive performance all the way around for the Browns offense, but they hit the road to play Indianapolis this week. They've got to get back to basics. Clearly, Colt McCoy still not ready to win games with his arm. You got to go with what works. You got to get the ball to Hillis. 20, 25 plus carries. And with the way Indianapolis gave up 167 rushing yards to the Houston Texans last week, Cleveland has to see this on tape and think, we're going to go ahead and run the rock. So Peyton Hillis should be in your lineup. Same thing for Cedric Benson when talking about the Cincinnati Bengals. Last week, goes for 121 yards and a touchdown at Cleveland. This week, he goes to Denver to take on a defense that gave up 190 rushing yards to Oakland on Monday night. Whoever's at quarterback in Cincinnati, it's not going to be a real experienced guy, whether it's Dalton or Bruce Gradkowski. Run the rock, give the ball to Benson, take advantage of the weaknesses. Let's also talk about James Starks from Green Bay. Last week, Thursday night, against New Orleans, 12 carries, 57 yards, and a touchdown. That's 11 fantasy points in standard scoring leagues on just 12 touches. This week, at Carolina, Green Bay, look for them to build a lead in this one and be able to run the ball late. That means more carries for Starks. It means more opportunities to score. We like him as a flex option this week. And last but not least, at the running back position, Cadillac Williams. Steven Jackson out for St. Louis. Williams is in. He goes for 140 total yards last week at home against Philadelphia. He goes to New York Monday night to take on a Giants defense that has struggled through the preseason, facing a lot of injuries, and has struggled in week 1 at Washington. Get him in your lineup. Moving on to wide receivers, Percy Harvin from the Minnesota Vikings. Didn't do much last week. It was a disastrous offensive performance outside of Adrian Peterson at San Diego. They come home, they regroup, they welcome in Tampa Bay, who got torched defensively by the Detroit Lions. So let's go ahead and get Percy Harvin in there. This is a rebound game. Donovan McNabb's going to step it up. Malcolm Floyd from the San Diego Chargers travels to New England. Only 3 receptions for 45 yards last week, but 8 targets. And with New England trying to lock down Antonio Gates and also Vincent Jackson, Floyd's going to get his opportunities. This game has shootout written all over it. Get Malcolm Floyd in the lineup. Stevie Johnson, keep it rolling with him. He's kind of an obvious one. Last week, 66 yards on 4 receptions, but also found the end zone. This week, Oakland comes to town. Short rest for Oakland. Time zone change. Flying all the way across the country, and no more Amdi Asamoah. Stevie Johnson should have another big week. Lastly, at the wide receiver position, Devon Bess from the Miami Dolphins. He's a good wide receiver 3. The game against Houston has shootout written all over it, with the Houston defense trying to contain Brandon Marshall after what he did last week, and a guy like Reggie Bush coming out of the backfield. Devon Bess should be able to work his way around, should have some favorable matchups. Last week, he catches 5 passes for 92 yards on 7 targets. Should have another game this week. Moving along to tight ends, going back to Tampa Bay, Kellen Winslow, get him in the lineup. Minnesota runs that cover 2 defense. That can be exploited by the tight end position. We've seen it in the past. Winslow's a good start this week. Caught 6 for 66 last week against Detroit. Also, Tony Gonzalez. He's aging. He's not as consistent anymore. But look at the matchup against Philadelphia. Philly's got great corners in Asamoah, Asante Samuel, and Dominic Rodgers-Cromartie. They should have some success against Roddy White and Julio Jones. But a young and inexperienced linebacking core from Philly is going to have to try to slow down Gonzalez. He can take advantage of this. And not only that, No team in the league gave up more fantasy points to opposing tight ends last year than the Philadelphia Eagles. So don't be surprised if Gonzo sees a little more work than usual from Matty Ryan this week. Lastly, on the start side, the Minnesota Vikings defense. Get them back in the lineup. At home is a very favorable situation for them. 18-6 over the last 3 years, only 18.4 points per game surrendered, 39 turnovers, 69 sacks in their last 24 games at home over the last 3 years. Tampa Bay comes to town. They struggled in week 1. We expect them to struggle again. So there's your starts list. Moving to the other side of the ball, the guys you do not want to play this week under any situation unless you are absolutely desperate. Start at quarterback. Kyle Orton for the Denver Broncos did not look very solid against an Oakland Raiders defense he should have been able to roll points up on. Brandon Lloyd is battling a groin injury. He might not be ready to go this week, and if he is, he's going to be less than 100%. In comes Cincinnati, who surprisingly played very well on defense last week. Also, with the opportunity that Noshan Marino might not be able to play, we don't like Orton this week. Find another option. Same thing goes for Cam Newton. Look, the guy was outstanding last week. 422 yards in his debut, but it was at Arizona against a suspect secondary. This week, it's going to be a lot different against a Green Bay Packers team on extra rest with Tramon Williams, Charles Woodson, locking down the secondary. We like Newton. Newton's headed in the right direction, but if you picked him up, don't go throwing him in the lineup this week expecting big numbers. On to the running back position. Let's start with LeGarrette Blount from Tampa Bay. The way I see it this year, until we see something, we got to go ahead and sit him. Only 5 carries for 15 yards last week against Detroit. Now on the road against Minnesota. Not a very favorable situation. Not too excited about LeGarrette Blount. Noshan Moreno, same thing goes for him. Battling a hamstring injury, probably won't play this weekend. Already start to make adjustments that he won't be in the lineup. You guys should go ahead and do the same. Be smart, look for another option, go with someone that's healthy. Marshawn Lynch, this is an easy one. At San Francisco, 13 carries for 33 yards. That's a 2.5 yard per carry average. That's pathetic. Didn't find the end zone, couldn't get it done. Seattle looks terrible. They're traveling across the country to play Pittsburgh. Forget about it. Get Marshawn Lynch out of the lineup. Lastly, at running back, Ben Tate. Great performance last week. In his debut, 24 carries, 116 yards and 1 touchdown. But he goes to Miami this week. Arian Foster is back, so the touches are going to drop. And this game smells like a shootout to me. Could be a lot of throwing based on what Miami looked like last week against New England. So Tate, his opportunity is going to be limited. Even after a great week, get him off the field. Let's move to wide receivers. Jeremy Maclin, hey, from the Philadelphia Eagles. Until he shows that he's got his legs back and he's 100%, let's leave him on the bench. Only 3 targets last week, 1 reception for 20 yards. Upside isn't there. Austin Collie didn't do anything last week. 3 targets, no receptions. Until Kerry Collins shows he can run this offense in an efficient manner, let's keep him out of the lineup. Mike Thomas from Jacksonville. 11 targets last week. That's what we want to see. 8 receptions for 55 yards. But he's going to be facing Darrelle Revis from the Jets this week. And at the very least, he'll be facing Antonio Cromartie. Not a great matchup. Jacksonville could be in trouble here, especially trying to get the passing game going. Put Mike Thomas on the bench this weekend. Lastly, Steve Smith from the Carolina Panthers. Same philosophy as Newton. He was great last week. Huge. 8 for 178 and 2. But this week, huge matchup against like we said, Charles Woodson and Tramon Williams from Green Bay, not very favorable. Get him out of the lineup. On the tight ends, Chris Cooley still battling knee swelling from the Washington Redskins. Fred Davis steps up big last week. Look for Fred Davis to step up big again as Cooley continues to work his way back to being healthy. Leave him on your bench. Also leave Mercedes Lewis on your bench. Same reason as Mike Thomas. You're playing the Jets. Good linebacking unit. Could be a day where this Jacksonville team struggles a bit against a great New York Jets defense. Lastly, 2 fantasy defenses you want to sit, both Atlanta and Philadelphia. Neither one of these teams would I want in my lineup this week. This game, Sunday night in the Dome, has shootout, like some of the other ones we talked about, written all over it. Philly is going to have some trouble slowing down Michael Turner. Atlanta could have trouble slowing down Michael Vick. Either way, I'm not confident in either of them. Last segment, before we wrap this thing up for the weekend, everyone, locks of the week. Awful prediction in week 1 by myself, taking those Pittsburgh Steelers. They got absolutely rolled in Baltimore. This week, we're going to try to turn it around with 3 selections. We like the Tennessee Titans plus 5.5 against Baltimore. Baltimore has that huge win against Pittsburgh. Tennessee tends to rebound when they lose games on the road and then come back home. We'll take the 5.5, especially when the game opens at 6 and moves to 5.5. If the early bettors really love the Ravens, this line want to move the other way. We're going to get on the Titans. We're also going to get on the Miami Dolphins plus 3 at home, getting points at home against Houston. Houston a bit overinflated in value after a huge win against the listless Indianapolis Colts team. We'll take the home team. We'll take the points. And lastly, Washington, Kansas City, over 44 points in this one. I think Rex Grossman's going to light that Arizona Cardinals secondary up. Kevin Cobb should come in. He should have some success like he did last week against Washington. They're not the most stingiest of secondaries in the league. We're going to go over 44 points. That's the fantasy report for this week, everybody. Best of luck, and we'll see you next week.